some people have been quite successful at. It's a little bit capped. It's not going to make you millions and millions, but it's a really nice, simple add-on strategy. And I really want to teach it to you because I came across this public domain publishing game pretty early on. And early on, I started self-publishing public domain books on my Kindle account. So I've had a bit of experience doing this. I've actually got a huge spreadsheet with what I spent, which narrators, which formatters I used, formatters, who I paid to do which cover designs and how much I paid them. I had all their Upwork links, all their prices. So I've got some really good up-to-date experience with this. I probably did between 50 and 100 in the last few months of these public domain books. And I learned quite a bit through doing it. And really the concept here is that we can have rights to the text that was written more than usually 100 years ago. Now there's some very precise rules to check that the book you might want to publish today, instead of writing a new book today, you get access to an old book like a Sherlock Holmes book that was written over 100 years ago, and you can republish that book. Now, Amazon has some rules about this. The copyright industry has some rules about this, the law around it. And then there's obviously some strategy and marketing. And then there's just the mechanics of building it. So that's what we're going to cover today. But first, let's have a look at how public domain publishing works. So I've actually got the help desk of KDP open here on one tab. I think I've got everything lined up ready to through and show you step by step what this is all about. But I actually think Wikipedia is quite a good place to show you how to get going. There's some good university and library sites that tell you which books have come off copyright, which means that anyone can now access and use those books. So where a patent given for 20 years to protect an invention, somebody writes something brilliant, after 100 years, it's public good. You know, that person's earned their money off it, that family's had their time getting royalties. It's now out into the public domain. So you go and have a look at this. You'll see that there's some very technical rules around when things become public. So at the moment, there's some books this year, like I think The Great Gatsby's maybe just come off copyright. There's a book like that. It was one of like the really big classics. It's just tipped over. So it's a little bit of a different country, but different rule country by country. Sometimes it's from when the book was published. Sometimes it's written to be effective until 70 years after the death of the latest living author. And then Mexico's got some different rules again. So in the United States, every book published prior to 1926 is in the public domain because American copyright lasts for 95 years for the books originally published between 25 and if it was properly maintained and registered. So it gets a little bit complicated. You really need to read the small print here depending on which country and which year your book that you want to republish was written in. So make sure you just do your homework there. It's all public knowledge. Creative Commons have done some good work to make this easy to help you understand what's free and what's not yet. If you spend 10 minutes on Google for the book you're looking at, you'll know whether you're able to use it or not. So just be really careful there. It'd be really dull to do all that work, publishing it, and then you get a nasty letter or Amazon doesn't accept it. So that's the first part, what is a public domain book? So often, you'll see all sorts of different publishing houses will publish William Shakespeare. So music, the same thing applies. Art, the same thing applies. So they've just been in existence for a very long time. Some artists make their work public domain immediately, but that's not normal. And that's, I think, all I need to say about that. Just check it out. And I think we're sort of into the mid-20s at the moment, at the time of this recording, with that 95-year rule. And every year there'll be a new flurry of books come available on the 1st of January that can be publicly published. So I should have really caught The Great Gatsby. I think that's the one that just came out at the start of 2021. So anyway, whoever did that best and well on Amazon will have a great time with it. So let's now come over to Amazon and have a look at which books are selling on Amazon that are public domain. So I'm going to use some just really big, obvious names like Shakespeare or Sherlock Holmes, Joseph Conrad, those books that are old classics. So let's have a look at, what's a good one to start with? Let's have a look at Sherlock Holmes. we'll look at a book. We'll just put a book. Here is a set of paperbacks. So I'll explain why they've done a set of paperbacks. So here's one, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So this was published in 2009, and it doesn't look like a really wonderful cover to me. Dover Thrift Editions. I mean, it's okay. Just stop this thing bouncing inside. Just bouncing bads. So here we get a paperback for $5.99. It's really cheap because nobody's had to pay a ghostwriter. No author's sat and written this any time recently. Yet it's got hundreds of reviews. Everyone knows it's going to be a great book if you like a good detective story. So there's an audio book and a paperback available, and there's lots of used and other ones available there too. And it's got quite a high rating. We can actually have a quick look over in Kindle Spy, see what the sales are. I don't think we'll bother with that. So we'll just go monthly sales. Not very high. I'm not sure I believe that. Maybe the book's higher. That doesn't sound quite right to me. I'd have thought that would be way higher. I never quite know how much to trust some of these tools. We'll try another one. We're going to do, what's another one? A Joseph Conrad book. If you haven't read Heart of Darkness, you should, it's very good. Which is basically the story, the novel that Apocalypse is based on. So, let's have a look in here. KD Spy doesn't always like just a page of results. Not sure what year the Ernest Hemingway books were written. They were set in the 20s, some of them. The Movable Feast was all in Paris in the 20s. So they might be coming close if they aren't already. Oh, Kindle Spy, driving me potty. All right, that's too hard. So anyway, what I wanted to show you was the sales on these books today, of books that were written 100 odd years ago. So you can see a book with a wonderful narrator, Kenneth Branagh. In fact, I bought this, put that on my phone. Nostromo, Secret Agent's another classic one, but the most famous one is definitely Heart of Darkness. It's a short book. And you can see that more than one person has published each book because they're all allowed to. But you'll also find, if you went and bought all of these books and ordered them, that they're all a little bit different. And what's going on here is, here's the Oxford University Press one with a very dark, deepest, darkest Africa and the Congo, going up the river. I mean, this was a really story. Brilliant, brilliant book. So it's ranked 44,000. There's no way that those sales are as low as... let's have a look and see if this little app's going to activate. I just want to see monthly sales. Not today. Not to worry. Okay, so we'll just show you that, you know, for example, this book here, Heart of Darkness, is this version with an introduction by Franklin Walker. This one here is by Oxford University Classic, and I'm sure that will have an introduction of some sort, or it will have some other tales, so it's a book with other short stories added, or maybe it's got some amazing illustrations. And I'll show you in a moment the deal that Amazon has with us as publishers for these public domain books. They're happy for us to publish old works, but on one of three conditions. One, either it's got an introductory section that has to be 20 pages long, and it's got to be unique and relevant to the book. So maybe you publish Heart of Darkness, but you do a 20-page biography of Joseph Conrad's life. He came from Poland or something, and it's a bit of a backstory to how he got to be able to write this book. Or maybe you write a book you publish some old biblical text, and you have a section at the front about the philosophy behind this type of religion, and then it goes into the original text. So this is one of the ways Amazon lets you use old books. is by bringing some twist to it, something useful for the reader. So one of the ways you can do that is adding an intro chapter. They would call it sort of an annotation. Bring up this is the Amazon page. So it can either be a unique translation of a foreign or ancient text. It can be annotated, so it could have a study guide, a critique, a detailed biography, or some historical context. I did some books about different old philosophies, so some Stoic philosophy books, and I republished things like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and then I had a 20-page intro all about the Stoic philosophy. So it was pretty simple to do, and I didn't write that intro chapter myself. I gave that to a girl on Upwork, and I actually gave her about 10 jobs of 20 pages each. I think the word count was 5,000 words, so it was significant, but not too much. And it cost, less than $100, I think, each time. And so that meant I could then stitch that front chapter onto the rest of the text, get the whole thing formatted to look and flow as one book, and then load it up to KDP. There's one other option which I've used for some of the religious books. So I had an old sort of ancient text that's religious, and I had a really nice illustrator do 10 illustrations which were relevant for that book. So say it's about saints or monks or religious symbols or something. You could actually do some original, get an artist to do some original illustrations for that book. So you can actually license in that artwork. There's a company called Creative Markets, and you can just pay for those vector images, or you can go onto Upwork or any of those freelancer sites and just look for a book illustrator or an artist who can just do some illustrations or diagrams for you. So the example they give here is that if you're doing Pride and Prejudice, you have to then mark in the title brackets annotated, if that's what you've done, and then it would have to say in the product description, you have to say what annotation's about. It's a commentary on the life of Joseph Conrad or whatever. So if you just read this little section here, it's very simple. I won't read it out for you, but you can see that Amazon's very strict on this. They don't want 50 versions of identical texts all competing with no point of difference, but they'll let us, with a little bit of extra work on our side, put these books up for sale. So the process from then going through which books to publish, we go back to the standard research of what's selling well on Amazon. And I think because I'm logged in, KD Spy is going to be particularly unhelpful. But often if you search, say, for the classics, we'll get some good ones here. Oops. I think I've had my laptop in the garden too much this summer, and there's some dust behind some of the keys. I think I need to get the vacuum cleaner onto it. So something like To Kill a Mockingbird, I'm not sure what year that was first published. Might not be quite old enough. That's not old enough. War and Peace. This is really testing my literary history. Jane Eyre, I'm pretty sure would be old enough. Mrs. Dalloway, I'm pretty sure Mrs. Dalloway will definitely be over 100 years old. Let's have a look. Might say here when it was published in the blurb. See, here it is, featuring a new foreword by Jenny Offel, the New York Times bestseller. It's a Penguin Classics Deluxe edition. So I'm a serious reader. I would buy a Penguin Classics Deluxe edition. I wouldn't buy a junky looking one from someone I'd never heard of, especially if it's a special book that I want to keep. So here we go. Doesn't say when it was first published. But you can see what they've done. They've put in this special intro chapter to annotate it. And that annotation is why they're allowed to publish it now. Let's have a look at another example. Let's just put the word illustrated in. What about something like Hilaire Belloc? So this might have some good illustrations because they're kind of cautionary tales. They're really grisly children's stories. So there's one. It's free on Kindle. Somebody must be promoting this. So he was a friend of Ernest Hemingway's. They were hanging out in Paris in the 20s. He's a real character, and these are really... Oh, so this is free, so that's no good for us. It's free because it was put into digital format by a community of volunteers. So basically you can just get it for free. It's only 64 pages. So let's find another one that's old but has illustrations. I'll try and think of a good example. So Macbeth, here's one with illustrations. Little Women, great illustrated classic. So this is somebody who's taken Little Women, which is definitely 100 years old, or 95 years old. They have been able to publish this book on Kindle today because they've put some illustrations in with it. And they're kind of in keeping with the time of the book. And those illustrations might cost $5 each, so you have to have, I don't know if it's 10 or 20. 10 illustrations. There's Alice in Wonderland, another classic that really lends itself to great illustrations. If I was going to buy a book of Alice in Wonderland to read to my children, I'd rather it had wonderful illustrations in it, characters, than a whole 20 pages on Lewis Carroll's life, which would be interesting for me, but because it's a children's book, that's great to have some really cool artwork with it. So there's some Treasure Island, Huckleberry Finn. You can see some books are just going to be great. You know, Moby Dick, brilliant illustrations there. War of the Worlds, a little bit sci-fi and actually probably quite illustrate, but somebody's done it. Call of the Wild, brilliant. That's a real classic. So here's a good example. So in the description, according to Amazon's policy, they have to say why it's different. What's their thing that they've added to give it this point of difference, whether it's the illustrations or the annotation or a translation. But no, nothing. That's another good book, actually. A bit sad, but good. So the illustration also doesn't include the front cover. That's within the book itself. So you need to then have someone who can format those illustrations, and you might need to choose colour printing for the production of the paperback and the hardback books, depending on how you do the illustration. So I'd probably go for black and white if you can, which wouldn't then make Alice in Wonderland so good, but Call of the Wild would probably be just fine. So that's how you learn what's allowed, the public domain dates. Then you can head over to Amazon and do your research of which books are selling. So I don't think Katie Spy is really playing the game for me today. Remember me. Katie Spy, not on form today. It's just a keyword one. I could start mucking around with Publisher Rocket and show you that way, but really, what I take into account when choosing which books to publish, I don't want there to already be, 10 really good-looking versions of that book done by Penguin Classics or, the really top publishing houses doing a really beautiful job. If my competition looks a bit like this, I feel confident I can take them on. This is a no-name production here. It's nothing special. It's cheap. I'd love to see what the total sales per month are. But if I saw that that was selling $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 a month, I would jump in there, because for a few $100s, I can get a slice of that market and very quickly earn back my hard costs and move straight into profit, get past that break-even stage really fast. So I would do a public domain book that's, say, $2,000 or more a month in sales, as long as it's not really crowded. And if there's only one or two sellers and it's doing $1,000 in sales, then that's probably worth doing. So it's just a bit of a judgment for you, your kind of risk and reward and, tolerance for doing a bit more work for smaller returns, or whether you only want to shoot for the big ones. So I actually think I've published Call of the Wild. I seem to remember in my big spreadsheet we did that one. So now let's have a look at where you go to produce these. So I'm just going to skip right over how to choose which books to do, because that's exactly the same process. You're looking at the amount of demand through the sales, using the research tools and the ranking. This will probably have quite a high ranking. It's a classic book. Yeah, there we go. 106 in all classic short stories. So there's actually whole categories you can go and look in, which are the classic short stories or classic fiction. It'll be the classic adventure historical. So this is good. You can go, and that's just on the Kindle ones. So some of these will be good for some good ideas. Not all of these are old enough. There might be a modern classic, but some of these will be old classics. Not convinced that Heartstopper is a classic in everyone's eyes, but this is what the people in fiction have to do. They have a really hard game getting ranked, so they go and do all these tactics and games. They go and put their books in the wrong categories to get a higher ranking, even though it's not at all what the customer's looking for. So Amazon hates this stuff. When people do this with products, Amazon gets really cross with them and makes their life quite miserable. So don't do this stuff. Don't do fiction unless you want to have to work really, really hard. So here's Lord of the Rings, brilliant. So I'm not sure, this is a HarperCollins edition. Somebody's put it in chakras, and just nonsense to try and get it ranked, which is just silly. But there we go. That'll have an introduction or something to make it unique and the reason why they can sell it on Kindle. So you can have a look through here for some inspiration. So some modern classics and some old ones. Gosh, it's full of just romance junk, really. Gosh, so much stuff. But also mixed in with Orwell and Tolkien. So the cowboy billionaire boss. That's the stuff that sells, but you've got to work so hard to get those sorts of fiction ones. Stick with non-fiction, for sure. So what we'll do now is head over to show you where you get this raw text from so that you've got something to give to a formatter who can then produce a book for you. So the steps from this point onwards are choose a title that's in enough demand and selling reasonably well, a couple of $1,000s or so a month. And that isn't really, really competitive. There aren't already 50 people selling versions and variations of that book with lovely front covers. You want some amateur competition to take on. Don't make it hard for yourself. Chase the easy wins. And then you can come over to a site called Many Books or Project Gutenberg. So these are really cool resources. I wish I'd known about this. Maybe it didn't exist when I was a student, but I spend so much money on books. And here's all these free ebooks. And some of them are fiction, but there's a lot of really good classics and old stuff in here that's old enough for you to publicly publish on the public domain. I'm not going to sign in, but if we go and have a look and say action and adventure, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So what we can do is just click on these. Here's the Call of the Wild. We can just click on it. You can see how many pages it is. Oh, go away, advert. Don't want this. I think if I press this, I'm going to get saved. I think it's a trick. Oh, good. So you see it's published in 1903, so we've got plenty of coverage there. It's well clear of the cut-off date. We can get different versions of it. We can download, when we press download, we might get different options for what format. Oh, I do have a site. Let me just log in. Oh, where do you remember? Just saying it. Oh my goodness, this is clunky today. You can see how it's not such a commercial game. You know, everything's just a little bit clunky. The tools aren't quite as slick as we get used to with Amazon products, for example. So what should we do? Hound of the Baskervilles, a good Sherlock Holmes one. So click on that. Some brilliant stuff here. I could just sit and read these for hours. So 149 pages. It's been downloaded 65,000 times. Now that's quite a good indication it's quite popular. So actually when I was doing this quite seriously, one of the things I did was go through all these different books and I worked out which ones were downloaded the most. I think on the homepage, they actually have like a little leaderboard of which ones are getting downloaded the most. There's a whole load of new junky stuff that's not always great, but I've just changed it. On the front of the top page, they used to say what was the most popular book that day. I don't think it was the one in Project Gutenberg. I'll show you this one in a second as well, but I'll just get it opened up. Oh no, here we go. Maybe it was in here. Where you used to be able to just click on frequently downloaded. Here we go. Ranked by popularity. This is a great place to fish around for good book ideas that you could publish, because they're here. You know, you can get them. You probably keep out the top 100, but you could do, you know, a few hundred. Top few hundred should have some really good high demand stuff, but not too competitive. So Dickens, Sherlock Holmes, there's Heart of Darkness. These are the really obvious ones that'll be really well done. It's odd enough, but you can see here the number of downloads, 28,500, 40,000 for Charles Dickens here, 33,000 for Alice in Wonderland. But there's tons and tons of books here, and there's lots of research that you can do to figure out what's a reasonably safe bet for something that you can launch. So a lot of this would come down to the front cover. So back over on Amazon, if we look at, say, not Kindle, but books, we want like actual book covers. So if we go Sherlock, oops. Some front covers will be wonderful, like this one just looks so like London back in the day. Different photograph, but then some will be junk. I mean, that's just rubbish, absolute rubbish. Fine, I suppose, if you're reading it on your Kindle, but I wouldn't put that on my bookshelf. It's just junk. Stories inspired by Sherlock. You see, that's brilliant. That is just like moody, spooky London. Brilliant artwork. This one, you know, has got all his signature tools of the trade. This look, that's brilliant with the pipe. Not sure about that. Awful. So, you know, some of these are tough competition, but some of it's absolute dross. You could easily, like, that's actually the Cover Creator standard free issue done by Kindle themselves. That's the free thing when you just use their Cover Creator free service. I recognise that. That's pretty cool. That looks like something you would keep, a special collector's item, $50. Beautiful. Now, these are real signature kind of classic books that people really want to own a good copy of, and they might give as a gift or be proud to have on their bookshelf. These aren't sort of throwaway books. So back to many books. This is where I downloaded most of the text of most of the books I wanted. So if I go to literary fiction and go, let's go Pride and Prejudice. Free download. See here all the different versions. So what I always did was just go for Word if they had it, or EPUB if they didn't. But you don't want PDF because that's hard for your formatter. Text is just a bit too hard work. They've got to do every heading and everything forevermore again, which is hard. But when you hire a formatter who can do some public domain work, then you just ask them what format they prefer to work with, but they'll tell you, and the rest of the training will tell you what format your finished work should be. But they'll need to go through. Sometimes there's some weird language stuff, or I was just trying to do a book that had some sort of old Tibetan language in it, and it was just too hard for the the formatting was just like, I just don't get this book. It just didn't quite flow when it was translated. So that's what you've got to choose from. I'll just do a download like this and we'll see how easy it is. All free. So good. And then you would just pop that into Dropbox. Oh, I didn't really want it to open in Apple Books, but that's what it's going to do. Fine. And then what we'll do is contact the formatting guy. Excuse me. Contact the formatting guy, say, hey, I've got a book, it's this many pages, can you give me a quote? And obviously the format that you downloaded in can vary a little bit. They might have single or double line spacing. So you agree a quote based on the word, or probably the page count. They might have to do some work. It might be all squished up and they might want to do 1.5 spacing, or the page size of your book is smaller. You're going to do 6 by 9 inches. And this one, when it was taken from the original, the pages there were much bigger, so they put a smaller page count. So you need to just negotiate that. And if you've got a good formatter, you'll be able to just have a good working relationship and kind of come to a bit of an agreement with a rate card or cost per job. But they do have to work quite hard. They go through line by line, tidying up messy hanging sentences and page breaks and heading and chapter breaks and the table of contents. They do a bit of work, page numbers, all of that stuff has to be accurate. So don't be too stingy. You don't want the book to come back full of mistakes. You can also then put that Word document through spell check, just to make sure that when the volunteers who go through these projects like Project Gutenberg and many books, they're actually volunteers. It's kind of a public good, common, it's like Wikipedia, it's just people being altruistic with their time towards a project they believe in, wanting to make these texts available for free. So most of the time, and especially for the big books, they're accurate the way they've been digitized, but sometimes there'll be weird spelling creeps in or something's just not quite right. So you want a formatter who's got their mind switched on and can tell if something looks off. They might not need to, check every single word spelling, but you could do that. And just have a scan of it yourself, check it looks right and that there isn't half the book missing or something. Sometimes the downloads haven't quite worked and you send it off and you think it's all there, but it isn't. So be really careful with sending stuff to the formatter, because it's awful if they finish the formatting and then you find you've got to send them more text. If you've had somebody do the intro chapter, then you can give them both documents at the same time and your formatter will stitch them together so they flow. What you also do is say to the formatter, here's the book Pride and Prejudice. If you get working on that for a couple of days, I'll get my copywriter, my ghostwriter doing the intro chapter. It'll be another 20 pages. It'll come through as a Word document in 2 days. And then, there's 2 things working in parallel. It just speeds things up a little bit rather than doing everything one at a time. So I like doing that, and my formatter was happy for that. I had a really good formatter, happy to recommend him. But if I do, then everybody goes there and then he gets busy and then he crashes and can't keep up and then isn't good anymore. So there's plenty of good formatters on Upwork is where I find most of mine. There's also plenty on Fiverr as well. So they go and do their formatting thing. I think on average it would have been about $100 or so for the format, the 20 for a good cover image. I can put in the resources section my kind of average rate card for formatting work, and I might be able to pop in a few names of formatting experts that I've used. There are some agencies that do this, but I kind of like using an individual for the formatting. And then I actually just worked with him on Skype and we used a Dropbox folder and he just pinged me when it was done. And then he would send back the final thing. And then I might need to spell check it or reread some bits, but generally it's pretty seamless and easy. It was very low stress doing the public domain publishing. So I think I did maybe 60, 70, 80 books, really cranked them out, had a little team. So I had a project manager, just doing all the big downloads and all the big uploads. That was pretty slow going. I had the formatter and I had a artist doing the narration, and I had the artist doing the front covers. And then I had a copywriter doing the blurb, which is on the back of the paperback. You need to have a blurb, and that's also quite similar to the book description. So I had the same guy who was on Fiverr about $30 ago would do the book description to load up onto the listing, basically on Kindle. And he would do a blurb for the back page as well. So if he knew the book, it was easy. And if not, he would just Google it, read some other Amazon reviews, look at some other copies of the same book and see what their blurb said. And it would be very short, 3 or 4 sentences. Heart of Darkness tells the story of a wild adventure up a river in Africa. This is a classic. This is one of Joseph Conrad's most famous novels set in da-da-da-da-da. One more sentence, job done. So you don't need to overdo the blurb. People aren't buying a book off Amazon because of the blurb, but they will pay a lot of attention to the book description, and that's where you want somebody really good writing those. So just pay somebody on Fiverr or Upwork $30 or $40 and you'll get a really good one done for that. And you really need that. They do the keyword research and it's really important you do that. Make sure when you put the title in, as Amazon said in their instructions, put the annotated or illustrated or translated in brackets, just as they show you in their example, and not how they say to not do. So in the product description, you must include a summary of how the book is unique in bullet point format at the beginning of the product description with a maximum of 80 characters. So it could say foreword by Bob, whoever, on the history of Eastern religion or something, or includes 20 beautiful charcoal drawings of the creatures in this book, whatever. So it's pretty simple. There's not very many steps. It's much easier than waiting for a ghostwriter for a few weeks to write something new. You don't need to write an outline.
When you launch, you want to run adverts for your book. There's definitely people searching for these. They really know which classics they want to have on their shelf. I was looking for an Ernest Hemingway book the other day. So these aren't all public domain yet, I don't think. But I want to keep these books. I want my son to read in the sea, and I want really beautiful copies. So that would not pass the Sophie test. Parnell Classics. Disappointing. But even it's okay. It just looks like someone's just made it themselves. That looks a bit better. Do love a photograph. That one's better. Much nicer. Not so good. Not good. Not good. Pretty good. You know, like, it's up to you, and it depends on the book. Like, I read these books so I know what I would like, and I know what kind of a guy Hemingway was, so I know what is appropriate. But some of these are, some not so much. Anyway, you'll work it out because you'll do your homework on what's already selling and what kind of people read those books. So there's not much more to say. Just to read, you go to just do a search on public domain rules for the country and the year that the book was written, and check that it's on a list of books that are off copyright. Find a formatter who can take a digital copy that you download from one of these free sources. So there's Project Gutenberg and many books are the two that I've used in the past. And then they'll do the formatting. You need to find someone to do a chapter intro or some illustrations or a new translation. I don't think I've ever done a translation, but I've done a few with illustrations, and certainly doing an intro chapter, 5,000 words to make 20 pages is pretty quick and easy and should be cheap. And there's plenty of people that can write. It's also going to get skipped over by most people. They don't buy a book about Joseph Conrad to read you talking about Joseph Conrad. They buy that book because they want to read Heart of Darkness. So don't overdo it. You know, fast is good. It has to be well written and decent, but it doesn't need to be, you know, Pulitzer Prize winning stuff. The other thing is you can actually have one intro chapter that leads into a few different. You could do all the Sherlock Holmes books, but write a bio of the author, or you could do a background to London in whatever years or something that's sort of relevant to the book. And, you know, the most famous cases of Sherlock Holmes is sort of almost like a short story on the front of the book. So it's pretty fun. It's pretty fast. It's quite low cost. You'd be under $500 easily for the whole thing finished. You could have one of these out a week if you put your mind to it. I think I was doing almost one a day with a bit of a team cranking them out. We would try and do 7 uploads every Friday, but they do take a long time to upload, as you know. So, well, I certainly find that here on my internet speed. So that's actually one of the limits, how many people you want logged into your account, uploading big files all the time. So that is all I have to say about public domain publishing. Very happy to have any questions to the help desk. If there's anything that's not clear, just let me know and I can do a supplementary little session. I'll go through my spreadsheet of the jobs I commissioned in the last year. Some of my better public domain books are selling kind of $4,000 or $5,000 in profit a month, which is very healthy and did not take a lot of work to produce. A lot of it comes down to the cover image, because these are books for book lovers and they're the classics. So the people don't buy these because they're cheap. They buy them because they want to read Jane Austen, because they're a bookworm. They want to read Shakespeare. Maybe they need it for school or university, but these are books that people buy to really read and really want to probably own and keep them. It's the sort that I might consider doing hardback copies of if it wasn't just so blooming annoying the way that Ingram Spark works with Amazon. So often you'll be competing with some really beautiful. Remember that Sherlock Holmes collector's edition that looked kind of leather bound? I mean, it's hard to compete with that for a collector's book, but you can also do a really beautiful, tasteful front cover, and that will go a really long way, because it's one of the main points of difference you've got with these classic books. Everyone's got the same text in the middle. You won't have the best intro chapter. You know, Penguin will have some Oxford professor who's an expert on, I don't know, Jane Austen writing that intro. So you can just do a good enough job on that, but a great cover, and you should be fine. I find it fast and profitable and easy. It's very low risk, very low stress. A lot of it can be outsourced, and it's just a really neat additional strategy to add to the mix. And I think it's a nice, easy entry point. You know, one of the things people struggle with is finding writers or choosing a topic. I mean, this is sort of done for you. It's a ready-made book that you just republish and make it look, you know, eye-catching and well presented. You could even do something like just make it large print. That would be something maybe nobody else has done. So I will leave it there. I hope you enjoyed that. Unfortunately, KD Spy wasn't quite playing the game, but it wasn't my intention to spend ages showing you how many dollars each book's making in sales. You can do that yourself. But don't go too low volume and don't go too competitive, and you'll, I hope, expect, would do very well with it. So it's a new strategy. Add it into the mix. Pick and choose your strategies. You can't do everything, but you can do anything. But I could live on my public domain books on their own if I did nothing else. All my other businesses stopped, all my other self-published books stopped, I could live off my public domain books. Don't know for how long, because everyone else can access those books too, but right now it's a survivable income stream, which is nice. So worth doing, and hope you have fun doing it too. Brilliant. And make sure you read all the books. There's some really good ones there. Best books ever, the old ones. You can do something like the BBC, you know, 100 books that you must read, and see if there's any good classics on there and if they haven't been overdone on Amazon. But also this ranking, the ranking over here on Project Gutenberg. It's got some good data there with the number of downloads. Some here I haven't read that I want to. All right, I should go and read some books, and you should go and publish books. Okay, see you in the next video. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. As usual, if you've got any questions at all, please email the help desk. Thanks.